Katie. I'm an emergency planning officer for North Yorkshire County Council, and what I really want to look at is resilience and emergency planning.
So when you say resilience, what do you mean by that? People might be a bit confused about resilience. Is that the same as emergency planning, or?
It's very much the same as emergency planning. We hope that emergencies won't happen, but if they do, then people need to be prepared. They need to be aware of a few simple steps that they can take to be able to make themselves and their family prepared and thus more resilient.
Right. So when you're talking about sort of emergency sort of situations, here we are in Clevin Moorside, Pickering, Helmsley. What are the kind of scenarios that you're thinking of? Because we live quite happily in these little towns, and toddle on from day to day. What kind of things do we need to start thinking about?
It can be absolutely anything. We plan for a huge range of emergencies. It can be something simple like people need to be evacuated because of a fire or flooding incidents. We have a lot of in North Yorkshire, right down to a plane falling out of the sky, the huge kind of train crash, mass fatality or mass casualty incident.
Right. So but normally we would think, okay, there's some flooding happening, or there's been a car crash or something like that. We would rely on the emergency services, train people to come along and deal with it. Mm-hmm. What about us as individuals? Why do we need to get involved?
I think especially in today's times, police cuts, fire cuts, things like that, there aren't as many services as we'd like. If there is a widespread flooding incident, for example, in North Yorkshire, there are simply not enough police and fire to attend all of the incidents. So we're looking at communities to have some initial plans, some initial steps to take so that they can get themselves going and hopefully start recovering before the emergency services get to them.
Right, okay. So what's your role then? You work across what kind of area?
I specifically focus on the Rydale area, but we all do work across the whole of North Yorkshire. So we have 7 members in our team, and we each work with a different district within North Yorkshire.
Okay, and so who are you working with? Are you working with sort of local community groups or local councils or individuals or? Everyone
and anyone who's interested in emergency planning. We generally focus on parish councils because that's a nice way into the community, but if there are specific community groups that are interested in emergency planning, then we're more than happy to come and talk to people.
And so can you give us an example of, in any of the 3 towns where we're going to be putting this film on the 3 blogs, but any of the 3 towns, can you give us an example of the kind of work you're doing at that level?
I think Pickering's quite a good example. We are in Pickering. They are actually in the middle of creating their emergency plan, so they're looking at what they've got across the town, what the risks are within the town. Obviously flooding's a huge one, but it's not just flooding that we're looking at. Down the road, a couple of years back, we had an unexploded bomb, and so we had to evacuate a couple of villages to look at that. So there's lots of local things going on, but until you experience emergency, it's not necessarily something that is in your thought process.
So when you say they, that's the town council that you're working with?
Yes, the town council.
And what does that involve? Lots of meetings, looking at different scenarios? Or?
Well, there's a little working group, so there's some of the parish councils, and I think a couple of the community members are helping as well. So they're just looking at what kind of things they can do to prepare. So they've identified a couple of buildings that they might use as rest centres. They've identified particular areas that might be particularly more at risk of flooding rather than some of the other areas.
And is this something in terms of the town council it's completely up to them as to whether they do this? Is there some kind of statutory obligation for them?
Unfortunately not, no. I wish I was. It'd make my job quite a bit easier if there was, but right. No, there's no statutory obligation. It's just good practice really. It's been promoted throughout the country. The Cabinet Office have national guidance on this, but it's something that we've been encouraging in North Yorkshire, simply because we are so different to a lot of the other counties in the country. We're very isolated, we can be so easily cut off. I think it's all the more important, and plus we've got the benefit of having I think a more traditional community spirit.
So could you take us through the different stages? You go and see the town council, you make some suggestions, they then go away and work up some scenarios and how they might cope, or what is the process?
We can offer lots of help and advice. We have something that's called the Community Risk Register, which people are able to view online. And that highlights the risks that are in North Yorkshire. What we do then is take some of those risks and assess whether they're relevant to that particular community or not.
Right.
We then advise the parish council to get together a working group, hopefully some members of the community along with some members of the parish council, so it really is a community plan rather than something that's just led by the parish or town council. As you've got available, what kind of resources have you got in your community? For example, have you got somebody with medical experience that might be able to help out really quickly in an emergency? Have you got somebody who's particularly interested in flooding or lives near the river who wouldn't mind either being a flood warden or an emergency warden to have a look, so that we've got some contact with people on the ground? Lots and lots of different things.
So you have a scenario of suddenly there's a flooding. I guess you don't suddenly get somebody from the council pulling the manual off the wall and sort of thing. What have we got to do next, kind of thing. I suppose in a way what you're saying is that people are prepared. They've gone through that scenario. They know, the doctor, the local resident knows that in that scenario they would have a responsibility to do A, B or C. Is that right? So it kind of filters down.
Yes, we ask people to volunteer, so that we've got a list of people who we can contact in an emergency. What we'd like to do is really get that one specific contact within the community, so that the police, the fire, the ambulance and also the emergency planning units can have a contact. So if for some reason we can't get there, or in those few minutes between us getting there and actually arriving at the scene, we can see what's going on the ground basically. So we've got that local contact with the local knowledge, who knows the community much better than we can ever hope to.
Can you give us some examples of where this has actually worked, where you've worked with a sort of parish council and you've had an emergency and it's all gone, despite being an emergency, really well because they've been prepared?
Yeah. There's not been an emergency, but Hovingham is a particularly active community in this field. They've created their plan. We've recently had a drop-in day, so we've made the community more aware that this plan exists. Obviously it's no good having a plan if you're parish council are going to stick it on the shelf, and the community don't know about it. So we can offer things, we can offer training, we can offer exercises, so that, like you say, people have gone through that thought process. Sinnington are a particularly active community. Again, they're in the process of writing a plan. They're quite often hit by flooding, and so they've taken measures. I know some of the houses have got flood barriers and flood protection, and they often use their village hall, things like that. So that's a really good example.
So an individual watching this film, say for example somebody who lives in an area which is prone to flooding, like Sinnington, and they haven't done anything about it, what would you advise an individual to do as opposed to a parish council? Could they come to you directly to get advice, or is it better to go through the parish council?
Either or, really. By all means, they can come to us. We offer advice to individuals as well as parish councils. If they know that their parish council has got a plan, then that's probably a good idea to start off with.
Right, okay. So, Kirby Moorside, Helmsley, they haven't got their plans sorted yet?
They haven't, no. We have had some interest. I have been to speak to the council at Helmsley, and we've given them a presentation, so we're hoping that they're going to take that forward and take those next steps and look at starting to create their plan. Likewise with Kirby Moorside, we've had a presentation and a discussion with a couple of the councillors, so we'd really like those councils to take that forward.
But if there were a group of individuals, as opposed to the local councils, I know town councils are extremely busy and they have a lot of priorities, and at the end of the day they're a group of volunteers, doing their very best for the town. Is it possible for a group of individuals within the town to take up this plan, take up this responsibility, to do it themselves?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, going back to Hovingham, it wasn't actually the parish council who started off with the interest, it was the Hovingham Environmental Action Group who wanted to do something, and through them starting, then the parish council then became interested.
We've talked a lot about parish councils, and what they can do. But on an individual basis, you were mentioning earlier something about what families can do within their homes in terms of being prepared. From what you were saying, it sounded a bit like when you're pregnant and you've got to get all the essentials ready for when you need to make that dash to the hospital. So tell us about that.
Yeah, we're encouraging people to create something we call a grab bag, which is literally any kind of bag. It's nothing special, simple rucksack or even a carrier bag might do. Just to look at getting a few key items together that you might need. If you are going to be evacuated by the police, then you've not necessarily got that time to go looking for the key items that you need. So think about things like having a wind-up torch, a wind-up radio, first aid kit, some bottled water. Have you got your keys? Have you got a phone charger? A lot of people tend to, in an emergency, grab the phone and forget the important thing, like a charger. It's just going through that thought process and thinking about what you would need if you were out of a house. Often if you're evacuated, you don't know where you're going to and you don't know how long you're going to be. It might be hopefully only a few hours, it might be a couple of days. So just think about, especially people with children, do they have a favourite toy that they won't sleep without? Do they need nappies and bottled milk, things like that? So it's just about thinking what's relevant to you and your family, and getting a few bits and pieces together. Obviously you can't keep your mobile phone in there because that's something you need every day. But bits and pieces that you can just put in a bag. If you are evacuated, hopefully you won't be, but if it does come down to it, then you've not got that thinking and running around like a kind of headless chicken to find some bits and pieces that you want to take with you. You can just take the bag and off you go.
And a lot of people think, well, what's the point? I'm never going to be evacuated. But then things happen, don't they?
They do, yeah. And I suppose every time something happens, people always think, oh, it won't happen to me, but you just never know. There's lots and lots of situations that can be in emergency. It's not necessarily the kind of big plane crash that you traditionally think of. We are talking about being evacuated because of a fire, evacuated even because of a gas leak. We had an example a few months ago in Scarborough where some utility company dug through the gas mains. So we had to evacuate those houses. That wasn't the traditional type of emergency that you think about, but those people were evacuated. They needed to get out really quickly, and we had to put them up in a rest centre until they were allowed back out.
And if they'd been prepared, it would have made life so much easier.
Well, absolutely. Like I say, if they have those few bits and pieces in their bag, they've not got to worry about their phone running out of battery, or if they have any nappies for the baby. Clearly you can buy bits and pieces when you're out, but especially for the more rural places in North Yorkshire, you're not necessarily going to be somewhere where there's something available, or it might be 3 o'clock in the morning.
What about somewhere like Rosedale? We've had some sort of freakish weather with snowstorms up in Rosedale, and instead of being able to get out, you actually get stuck in.
Yes.
It's kind of the opposite, really. What would your advice be for communities like that are kind of on the edge a little bit in terms of communication?
Yeah. For those communities, it's even more important that they think about their community emergency plan. So what resources have they got in their community? They don't need to go outside, they've just got what they need in their community. So do they have Mrs Goggins down the road with an R5 Arga, for example? So if there's a power outage, that might be something to consider. One of the places, I forget its name now, has recently had a power outage, and they've actually got together with their local council and some of the residents, and they've actually purchased a generator, so that if the power does go out, then they've got a generator in their village hall. They can all congregate in the village hall. Brilliant. And they've got something, rather than having to go stay with relatives or go and stay in a hotel or something like that.
And what about just thinking there about particularly elderly people who might be living on their own, and they might not see this video, they might not be become aware of this sort of idea about emergency planning. I suppose it's the responsibility of all of us to know who are the people in our community who might need particular help.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, like I mentioned before, People in the community know the community, they know it much better than we ever can, so you are the people who know 2 doors down the road there's an elderly lady who might need a bit of help, or it doesn't have to be elderly ladies. We think about vulnerable people being elderly or disabled. Is this somebody who's pregnant, for example, who can't particularly walk fast or carry heavy things? As is somebody who's recently broken their leg who might need some extra help. It's not necessarily about the elderly people who would need that extra help. So it's about being a good neighbour, really. Check on your neighbours. If you've not seen people for a few days, go and knock on the door, see if they're okay. In an emergency situation, obviously yourself and your family is a priority, but have you mentioned to the policeman that there is a vulnerable person a few houses down the road?
I guess at the end of the day it's all about sustaining our communities and making sure that people are cared for and looked after, and we're working together as communities for the kind of community good.
Yes.
Katie, thank you so much. It's been really interesting and thought-provoking having a chat today. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.